G's, no design on my jacket. Work hard, now I'm changing my bracket. Talk tough, we ain't hearing that racket. Dots came in, you know how to stack it. Don't take it wrong, but I'ma need my ends though. I got tigers on my chest like Kenzo. Rail came, yeah, he putting that Benz though. Carol's here, man, you know he stay 10 toes. Big dog, man, you know I ain't worried. Bent up, so I'm talking real slurry. Got a blast, bro.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is Adam Caplan, the voice in your ears with AC Radio. We're back at it in 2023, baby. Let's just say, ready to hit it off, man. I got my Mr. Rogers sweater on, looking every bit like a trust fund kid. But here we are. Thanks, Mom, for the sweater. Happy birthday to me. 31 on Christmas Day. But anyways, man, we got a lot of friggin' news to get into here because, you know, last week, Mr. Jake Paul has done it again, and he has made his way into mixed martial arts, into MMA with PFL. Not only is he going to be signing as an influencer and let's just say a representative for the promotion, but he's also going to be fighting for PFL, which is absolutely crazy because not only has he turned into a professional boxer, but now he has the possibility and the option to now become a professional MMA fighter. And to me, the move makes total sense. Because, you know, one thing that Jake was doing was constantly combating Dana White in the UFC about fighter pay, but didn't necessarily have or to present a better option for the fighters to go to. So now that Jake Paul is affiliated with PFL, you know, he hasn't fought for them yet. So, you know, we're all calling him a fighter for PFL. Let's cross that road when the bell goes ding, ding in the smart cage, as they call it. But let's be real here. Now him actually having a promotion to lead the fighters to is a very big threat to the UFC, I would say. I mean, look, the UFC mishandled the Shane Burgos situation in not re-signing him. He dipped out and went to PFL because he could make more money there. He could fight more often, and he is a strong candidate to win $1 million. So now that PFL has Jake Paul to help combat the UFC, it makes things a little bit interesting. So, you know, let me gather my thoughts in order here. Let's talk about Jake Paul first. I mean, first of all, he's going to be bringing in something that's called a super fight pay-per-view for the PFL. Okay. Which means that if Jake Paul fights, it'll be on pay-per-view. You could bet that. And I also have a prediction that investor and also performer for PFL, Wiz Khalifa, will be fighting also in 2023. So already you got Jake Paul and Wiz Khalifa that will most likely, if not definitely, fight for the PFL in 2023. And when those events go on, initially what I read is that Jake Paul and his opponent, or Wiz Khalifa and his opponent, or whoever the super fight may be, and their opponent will split 50% of the pay-per-view buys. But that's indeed not the case, I believe. Now, what I've read in the most recent news is that the card entirely will share 50% of that pay-per-view. And, you know, Jake Paul has been talking about equal fighter pay. Hey, this is a big fucking deal. When Sugar Sean went over to Abu Dhabi to fight Peter Yan, okay, he did not get a dime for those pay-per-view points. When the majority of the folks had their heart rates elevated and were out of their seat the most for the Sugar and Peter Yan fight. But who got the pay-per-view points? Only Islam and Charles. Let's be real here. I'm sure more folks were out of their seat, person by person or whatever, for Charles and Islam, due to the fact that if you just look at Russia and Brazil alone as fight fans, I'm sure the majority of the world were on their feet more for that fight, but a lot of them were also on their feet for Sugar's fight, and he didn't get pay-per-view points for it. So now, having this in order, guys like Jake Paul, guys like Wiz Khalifa, or other folks that they bring to the table, maybe even a Logan Paul, and, you know, also super fight, you know, maybe Jake Paul gives Tyron Woodley and Anderson Silva a super fight opportunity, not against him per se, maybe against each other. And then they have the possibility also to help the fighters on the card get a little bit more money out of those pay-per-view points. And I know you're thinking, well, look, they did, I believe, 10,000 buys PFL in their last event, like 50% of at each event at 10,000 events at $60. That's $600,000, I believe. Yeah, okay, I get it that it's not the most money in the world, but, you know, for some of these guys that are making 12 and 12, 15 and 15, 20 and 20, every little bit counts. And if Jake Paul is showing, like he has showed before in boxing, that he is willing to give up some of his pay for folks on the undercard, I think that that's a big deal. And now he has a place to bring some of those fighters. So this is really fucking interesting because now what we also have in order is Jake Paul is able to do things like two-way contracts. He could fight a Nate Diaz or a Mike Perry in boxing and then go on to rematch them in MMA. So then they have two fights. That's double the storyline, double the press conferences, double the sound bites, and double the time spent together fighting, which to me is very interesting. And I think it's a calculated move by Jake Paul because now that he's entered the fight game, he's realized how difficult it actually is to get fights to fucking happen. It's not that easy. I think Jake Paul and Tommy Fury will go in the same sentence for the next 5 to 10 years, and that might be Tommy's plan. I don't need to ever fight the guy. As long as I show up in the headlines, that'll help boost my ratings for all of my other fights. So that to me is very, very interesting. And now we have the possibility of Jake going to fight Nate or going to fight Perry in boxing and MMA. Like I said, it's double everything, double the fun, whatever the fuck Katy Perry said. And I like that. I like that because now we have rubber matches. Now we have storylines. Ladies and gentlemen, we have entered the entertainment era in mixed martial arts. We already had it in boxing, and now we have it in MMA. Because not only is this going to bring guys like Jake Paul, guys like Wiz Khalifa, guys like Logan Paul, maybe an Anderson Silva, maybe one day even a George St. Pierre. I know that's never going to happen, but we have the possibility now to get these guys paid, laid, and more eyes on them than maybe they would have had in the UFC, because now not only could they fight Jake in boxing, they can now fight him in MMA. And to me, that is a really, really interesting go. You have the likes of Nate Diaz on the list, which is obviously a shoo-in for a boxing fight. For an MMA fight with Jake, let's be honest here. If the fight goes to the ground, it's all fucking over. Okay? Cesar Gracie Academy black belt in Nathan Diaz would absolutely roast Jake Paul on the ground. But we know good old Nathan's going to want to stand and trade with Jake and feel what Jake Paul is made of. And then like he did to Conor McGregor, you best believe when the fight ain't going Jake's way, that's when Nate will look to utilize his jiu-jitsu. So that's why I think it's an interesting one. But look at Mike Perry. Mike Perry shocked the world in beating Michael Venom Page, the poster boy of Bellator MMA, which is also for sale. We'll get to that in BKFC in an overtime round. Mike Perry could scrap, baby. And you best believe he ain't interested in taking Jake Paul down in the smart cage. So that's why it's a great matchup for Jake. He fights a shorter, smaller guy who likes to stand up and bang, and Jake has better boxing than Mike Perry. Does he have more balls? Does he have more heart? Does he have more grit and tenacity? Hopefully we find out in 2023. But this is why guys like Nathan Diaz and Mike Perry should be salivating, because now they don't only have the option to fight Jake once, they have the fucking option to fight him twice. And then maybe even a third time. So to me, this is a really big deal. And just to get it out of the way, I have a little bit of a list of guys that Jake could fight. We have Nate Diaz and Mike Perry at 1 and 2 in boxing and in MMA. At number 3, I have Uriah Hall. Look, guy didn't put on a performance against Le'Veon Bell that made the fat lady sing. It was a little bit of a boring fight. I think that Uriah Hall brought the same tendencies and timidness that he has in the octagon that he did also in the boxing ring. And that is that he looks like he's reluctant to actually do damage and finish his opponents. That's a perfect fucking guy for Jake Paul to fight in MMA and in boxing, especially at the fact that Uriah Hall, again, wasn't much of a ground fighter. So Uriah Hall, 3rd place. That's a great one for me. I have Anthony Pettis as well. But keep in mind, Anthony Pettis might be up there in age, might have not had much success in PFL, but you always have to take a guy seriously who was a UFC lightweight champion and also submitted Benson Henderson by armbar. That is a crazy, crazy feat and was one of the most shocking submission victories that we have probably seen that came out of nowhere in the first round. So you best believe that in the MMA part of things, Anthony Pettis is obviously something to worry about. Thiago Santos, I think he's a little bit big, but the fact that he was one of John Jones's opponents could be a big feather in the cap for Jake Paul. And then lastly, we have my guy, the Hurricane Shane Burgos, which is definitely not going to happen. I think that the discrepancy in weight is too much, and I just think Shane is just much, much, much too high level. And Shane is the closest in his prime than any of the previous guys that I mentioned. And then now we're going to LOL a bit because I also have another list of guys that could work. Jeremy Stevens, Yoel Romero, Michael Page, and then, Sabah Homasi and Jason Jackson could be good because it could be a bridge to fighting bigger guys in this that come out of the state of Florida that have close ties with Homasi and Jackson, and then Lorenz Larkin. But Larkin would have been somebody great maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, but now it's kind of ran its course a little bit, etc. So look, man, a lot of friggin' options for Jake to fight in MMA and in boxing, and now that Bellator is for sale, they're probably not going to continue their deal with Showtime, which is what I believe is one of the reasons why Jake ended up going with PFL and not Bellator, because he already knows that Bellator and Showtime won't be continuing. So that easy tandem that he would have had fighting with Showtime and then being signed to Bellator isn't really an option anymore if they're not going to sign. But what if PFL buys Bellator? What if number 2 and 3 or number 3 and 2 fuse together? That makes for a bigger roster, bigger fights to happen. The light heavyweight division gets a hell of a lot more exciting. If I'm Rob Wilkinson, I'm probably pretty salty because the Bellator light heavyweight division is probably one of their better ones, one of the most competitive with the UFC. So, that would help beef up the light heavyweight division. It would help beef up the heavyweight division a little bit. And then obviously it would help maybe bring a middleweight division. It would obviously beef up the welterweight and the lightweight division and the featherweight. It would just beef up all of them. But is that what PFL needs? Do they need more beef? I don't think so necessarily. I think they've proven to put on a pretty successful promotion with what they had. I think that they're going with the less is more model because we want our fighters to fight more often. And you best believe if they get injured, we already have alternates in place. So don't worry, we're a step ahead. So I don't know if they actually necessarily need Bellator, but I'll tell you one thing, Bellator needs to move on from Scott Coker. I just think that he has been reluctant to build Bellator to the brand that maybe they deserve to be. And I know on the last episode for the MMA Awards, I gave them the second promotion next to the UFC. But let's be honest here. It was a little bit of recency bias on my end due to the fact that the PFL didn't do that great in their final pay-per-view when I had been reluctant to look at any of the numbers that Bellator has been doing. And then you add in the whole tape delay garbage every time they fight overseas. One of their biggest fights of the year, the fight when they go to Ireland, is on tape delay. We already know the results before they air it. It's nonsense. So, Coker has just been reluctant to build the brand to what it needs to be. And I'm wondering if, fusing with PFL could be one of the great moves, or they find a new owner and maybe a new face and a new promoter for the company to help again combat it against the PFL and the UFC. But in my opinion, I think that PFL and Bellator fusing could be a really big advantage. But my fear is that there are a lot of people on the Bellator and PFL side of things that fight on the smaller show or the Challenger series that might get completely left in the fucking dust. So I'm not really sure how that part is going to go, but I believe that Jake Paul knew that Bellator and Showtime were going to part ways and that Bellator is already selling. It's not the move for Jake. So congratulations to Jake. A smart move going into the PFL. We'll be seeing him hopefully fight in 2023 in the Octagon. Unfortunately, this also gives an opportunity for Dylan Dennis to continuously troll people because now that Jake Paul has entered the space of MMA, you best believe that the space of influencer boxing is going to cross over into influencer MMA. Logan Paul, Jake Paul, both have wrestling backgrounds. Brandon Buckingham, who we saw in Misfits Boxing, has a wrestling and jiu-jitsu background as well, won a NAGA championship while throwing up in between tournaments. So, Guy is a good candidate for MMA as well, influencer-wise, Brandon Buckingham. So you have all these people that could now not only fight in the boxing realm, but could also cross over to MMA. 3 rounds at 3 minutes apiece. I don't know, you put 8, 9, 10 fighters on the card. You got a couple of people rolling around. Some of the fights may get a little bit too boring, so they might have to find out, how to enforce some rules. But, like I said before, the entertainment era is here to fucking stay. I mean, influencer MMA is going to blow up. We're going to see more freak show fights in the MMA space, maybe even from PFL as well. I mean, look, to an extent, even though Wiz Khalifa has been training for so many years at Undisputed or whatever it is with Jay Glazer in California, he's been training, working on his physique and his body. Guy used to be a toothpick, and now he's a little bit thicker. Maybe he's more like a doctor's popsicle stick. He's got the chance now to get in the ring or the smart cage and put more fucking asses in the seat. And you best believe, with sharing that 50% in pay-per-view points to the rest of the fighters on the card, when you're fighting on Jake's card or you're fighting on Cameron Thomas's card, aka Wiz Khalifa, you best believe that more views are going to get there, which means that more pay-per-view money and pay-per-view points are going to trickle down to everybody else. So I love the opportunity. I love the option. Everyone who's hating, everyone who has something to say, I've said it once and I'll say it again. You're still going to cover it. You're still going to watch it. You're still going to take time out of your life to watch this shit. So at the end of the day, buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but you're still going to enjoy it. So, Jake Paul does it again, and that's all I got to say about that. So, a little bit of an interesting thing here. And, from there, I want to segue to a little theory that I have about things. And AC doesn't really get into the theories all that much, but here we are. There is some news trickling in the air that Khabib Nurmagomedov is no longer going to continue being involved in MMA as a coach, as a promoter, etc., as a manager, whatever the case may be. And I'm going to take a sip for this one, because I'm going to blow your mind. I think that Khabib Nurmagomedov's decision in leaving MMA as a whole to be an investor and focus on business is partly due to the fact of the issues that Dana had with his wife over New Year's. And the reason I think that is that I think Khabib Nurmagomedov is looking at himself and says, I'm a devout Muslim. I am, a very influential athlete. I'm one of the biggest athletes in the world. I am, one of the biggest influencers and leaders of combat sports, and especially as a devout Muslim to the Islamic fans of mixed martial arts, etc. I think he's looking at Dana White and he's kind of like, well, I'm a promoter of Eagle FC. You're a promoter of the UFC. If you're going around like doing these things, what does that make me? I think that might be going through in Khabib's mind. If you're going around and having some altercations with your wife and you're a fight promoter and I used to fight for you and be one of the biggest superstars and you've made the most money off of me, and now I'm a fight promoter and I'm trying to, kind of do what you're doing, and then you're going around and doing this, Dana, what does that kind of make me? And I think that embarrassed Khabib. And I think that made him maybe second guess being a promoter. I really do. And then on the other front of being a coach, listen, man, after Islam fights Alex Volkanovski, if Islam wins, there's really nothing else for Khabib to do as a coach. He has already mentored and coached and called his shot in Islam being the next best thing in MMA and the UFC after he leaves. If Islam does that, there's nothing left for Khabib to do. So I think that after February, one of the reasons also why Khabib is gone is because every time Khabib steps into the octagon, whether it's for Bellator or for the UFC, he has become the star of the show. Bellator and the UFC social media pages eat Khabib out of the palm of their fucking hand every single time he steps into the ring or is sitting cage side at one of these fights. They're bringing more exposure to their company by having those quick clips of Khabib there. And, I just got to say that I think that Khabib is done with these promotions and done with, just giving these opportunities for them to take the clout off of him. And then on top of that, he's in the pool with Dana White, who's now like, in a little bit of a pickle. We're talking about a fucking guy here who made a promise to his mother that he will never step back into the octagon again to defend his title and his legacy, because she does not want him to compete without his father being alive in his corner. in the prime of his career, where he had way more money to make in the octagon, he made a promise to his mother and his faith that he would never get back in the octagon. And if you think a guy like that with that type of character, that type of stature, that type of discipline to his faith and his religion wants to be affiliated in and around the same conversations with someone who maybe perhaps puts on an act like that with their loved one, you are out of your fucking mind. And that's why I think that Khabib Nurmagomedov is perhaps taking a step away from MMA, because I think that he sees all of the BS that comes with it and doesn't want him, his name, his family, or his faith to get cross-pollinated in that mess. And that's my belief. And after Islam Makhachev perhaps beats Alex Volkanovski, there is nothing for Khabib to do in the sport of MMA ever again. AC Radio, we're out, baby.
Big G's, no design on my jacket. Work hard, now I'm changing my bracket. Talk tough, we ain't hear that racket. Dogs came in, you know how to stack it. Don't take it wrong, but I'ma need my ends though. I got tigers on my chest like Kenzo. Rail came, yeah, he putting that Benz though. Carol's here, man, you know he stay 10 toes. Big dog, man, you know I ain't worried. Bent up, so I'm talking real slow.